Taylor Elwood here with Sovereign Submission. And today, I want to talk about the tension that men feel in their bodies and how that tension actually leads them to shutting themselves down. Now, part of this comes from reading a book called Unbound by Kasia Aranek. And one of the concepts that she talks about in her book is the concept of smush. Smush is that feeling of inner tension where our internal reality does not fully align with our external reality. And as a result, what ends up happening is we don't express ourselves. And this is something that I've found to be true for humans, period. It doesn't men or women or otherwise identified. We have that experience of smush where we basically are locking ourselves down and not expressing things that need to be expressed. And a lot of times when we lock ourselves down and express the things that need to be expressed, or we're not expressing them, I should say, we let that tension that tension show up. It ends up defining us, and it defines us in a way that actually stops us from giving voice to the fullest expression of ourselves. I want to welcome Michelle. Thank you for being here, and welcome Ray. Glad to have you here. And if you guys have comments or questions, feel free to um, open the door to that. I'm here for it. So here's the thing that I think is really important with all this is that I look at myself as and like it was interesting. Like I woke up this morning and I felt this tension in my belly. What I actually want to do is I want to invite you, if whether you're live or you are whether you're live or you're watching this recorded, I want you to take a moment and close your eyes. Just take a deep breath in. And hover your hand over your body, and I want you to just find on your body the space where your body feels tense, where it feels out of sorts, where it feels like there's something going on. Like in my case, it's the belly. So I'm going to put my hand on my belly right now. Just gently put your hand wherever you feel that tenseness. Take a deep breath in and then out. And give yourself permission to express whatever is there. In my case, I'm going to express anxiety. There's anxiety here in the belly. So I'm going to just say anxiety. Now, what am I doing? I'm calling it. I'm naming it. I'm giving it. I'm letting it be expressed. I'm not fully expressing it, but I'm speaking to it. This is one of those things that is really important for us to do is to be able to acknowledge and recognize where we are limiting ourselves in certain ways from expressing what is going on within us. Welcome, Christian. Glad to have you here. Here's something that I found to be true is that what we don't express defines us. So the tension that we feel, the things that we leave unsaid are usually what defines us because what ends up happening is we end up having conversations in here in our head about all the things that we want to express and speak but that we aren't speaking to, that we aren't addressing, that we aren't opening up. And it's really important to get crystal clear on that stress, that tension, on the things that we aren't acknowledging. And yet what I'll find is that a lot of times people won't. And this really interestingly enough applies in some ways to like submissive dynamics because if we look at it, the difference between submissiveness and codependency is that the submissive has a voice and uses it, whereas a codependent person does not. A codependent person will lock themselves down and not speak to what is going on within them. And the reason they won't is because on the one hand, they feel this tension, this fear, this stress, this anxiety, or whatever else. And on the other hand, they're like, I can't express it because if I express it, I'll get abandoned. I'll get rejected. I'll get left. And so I'm going to push it down and I'm not going to express it. I'm not going to acknowledge it. This is actually one of the most harmful things that we can do to ourselves. And this is where the smush lives. The smush is that part of ourselves that says, I have this thing I need to express, and I'm not going to express it. Now, Cassia Bronick was writing her book for women, but as I read it, I was like, this applies to men as well. And I think there's an interesting stereotype that a lot of times around men, that men are very expressive or will speak what's on their mind or whatever else. And yet, if we look at it, there's a contradiction there because, for example, one of the only acceptable emotions that men are told they're allowed to feel is anger. They're not allowed, for example, to feel grief. They're not allowed to feel joy. They're not allowed to feel some of those deeper emotions that are definitely there and part of the human experience because feeling that and expressing it goes against what they've been told it means to be a man. Now let's apply this from a submissive dynamic. If I'm a submissive person and I'm not expressing something, what I'm essentially doing is I'm not serving my dominant. I'm not serving the person that I'm with because I'm keeping something from them. And as a result, I'm not showing up with the full presence that is needed to give them the service that they would expect. I'm not showing up in service to myself either because I'm locking myself down. And I'm locking myself down for whatever reason because I'm letting that tension define me. One of the healthiest things that we can do is express what is on our hearts, what is in our bodies, what is happening within us. And we can do that without having to necessarily be vulnerable. I see a lot of articles out there about vulnerability and like why it's important to be vulnerable. But if we look at vulnerability, vulnerability is saying, okay, like, hey, I'm in this place and I'm going to show you my wounds. And it's okay if you see those wounds and do something to them potentially, but it's not like we don't feel safe about that. I would opt for a different term, which is transparency, because transparency is much better. If I can say in all transparency, like, hey, I'm really feeling a lot of anxiety right now. And this anxiety is showing up in relationship to X, Y, or Z topic, then I'm being transparent. And that transparency is really important. But I'm not necessarily bearing my wounds and saying, hey, I'm feeling anxious because of this childhood trauma that I'm carrying and it's being activated right now by something that you're doing. Aside from the fact that potentially we're projecting that wound onto somebody else, we're also not really taking ownership of it. So there's a very real difference with that. And I'm not saying that we should ignore like our childhood trauma or anything like that. I just think that sometimes what we need to do is we need to differentiate between transparency and vulnerability. It's fine to be vulnerable under certain circumstances. Those circumstances might be, for example, sitting in speaking with a therapist, or it might be sitting in circle with other men, or if you're a woman, with other women, sharing something that's going on. And on occasion it may also be perfectly fine with your partner. There are going to be moments where you're with your mistress, your master, your wife, your husband, whatever the terms are that you use, and you are going to need to be able to express some vulnerability. And I would suggest that one of the things that we can learn to do with our attention is actually sit with it and say, well, what is it that you're really trying to communicate here? And so this is why sometimes being in the body can be a really helpful expression and opportunity to explore, like, what is it that I actually am feeling here? What is it that what is it that has my anxiety up today? And is that something where it's coming from a wounding? Is it just coming from something that I'm not voicing, a need or a want that I want to speak to? So coming from something else. That can be a really important place to take this. Because I think that in the end, what we're dealing with here is we're dealing with this feeling of in regards to this tension is what we're essentially dealing with is this very real experience and sensation of being and how that being shows up in us. And we all have something in our bodies right now. I don't think that there's any one of us that doesn't have something in our bodies that's saying, hey, there's something here. The body really does keep the score. And it keeps the score for people in different ways, but it's there. I mean, I can easily safely say, like, I can point to a number of different root causes for why I'm feeling the anxiety that I might be feeling. And that's okay. But by acknowledging that there's the tension there and acknowledging that this tension lives, that's where we get to say, okay, do I want to let this tension continue creating? Do I want this tension to continue to persist in my body? Do I, for example, do I want to be in this place where I'm in this comfortable discomfort of the smush, where I'm not fully expressing something, where I'm locking something down, where I'm keeping something to myself? Or can I share it? And can I share it in a way where it's not necessarily about putting all my wounding out on somebody, but it is about saying, like, hey, here's something that's going on, and there's something here that needs to be explored, and I want to explore it with you. Can we even do it with ourselves? Case in point, like one of the things that I did earlier today is I pulled out my drum and I drummed for a little bit. For me, that was expressing something. I felt like I needed to express something in my body, and I gave it permission to do that through drumming. Sometimes I do it through martial arts. Sometimes I do it through other things. Now, I want to be very clear also at the same time that while that can be good in the moment, it's also important to have conversations with people. And something that I was like sitting with today is like, well, as I was waking up this morning is like, like what is showing up for me around like the sense or the experience of smush for myself in my life? Because I was like, I'm feeling some smushiness today. I'm feeling some sense of like things that I want to keep like I'm seeing like where I don't communicate or where I hold myself back or where sometimes I direct my attention inward because there's this part of me that's saying like, oh, if I say the wrong thing, people are not going to like me or something like that. And I'm letting that part dictate the conversation that I'm having or the way that I'm showing up in the world around me. This is part of like us learning how to live with our tension and be with it is like being able to recognize how that tension shows up, where it shows up, and the way that we express it. And if that's serving us or if it's actually holding us back. So I invite you to get really curious about that because I think it's so important to recognize it. And welcome, Sheena. Glad to have you here. So, for any of you, if you have questions or comments that you want to share, things that are kind of coming to mind as you're hearing this, please do, because I love when these things become interactive. And I want to invite you really toward this idea and this concept as well of like, what does it mean for us to be with the tension enough to the point that we're not living with it and suppressing it, but that we're actually expressing it and giving it voice. Because a lot of times with tension, if we're just directing it inward and pushing it down, we're not dealing with it. We're just suppressing it and it's going to show up. It's going to show up in our health. It's going to show up in the way that we relate to other people, but it's going to show up in like passive aggressive ways. It's going to show up in ways that aren't good for us or good for the other people involved. But if we give our attention a voice and we say like, hey, this is what's going on, or this is where something's showing up for me. There's something here that can be explored without having to necessarily make it even a deep, blow by blow conversation, but just a hey, I'm noticing this. This is a touch point here. We give ourselves permission to voice it, and then it no longer defines us. It's no longer encapsulating who we are. And we move on from it because that tension that was defining us because it wasn't being expressed is suddenly been given direction. It's been given flow and movement. And that movement and flow provides clarity around what needs to be done, what needs to be changed, or even just what needs to be explored and sat with for a while. But it gives us something to do instead of just living a life of quiet desperation where outwardly we're projecting, oh, like life is fine, everything's great, but like we're white knuckling it through and we're just like, oh, like that. And that's something that like I think it's so important to sit with. Where am I holding myself back? Where am I limiting myself? Where am I pushing things down when I could be speaking much more clearly? No one else can do that for me. I've got to be the one willing to give voice to whatever's going on. And it doesn't mean that I have to say it like in a tactless or clueless kind of way. I can take a moment and really be with it and say, well, what is it you're trying to express? What is being felt here? I can journal it. I can do other things. But the important thing is that we don't let it continue to define our lives because as long as we allow it to define our lives, it will control the way we think of things and the way we express things. All right. That's my TED Talk for today. Thanks for watching. And I would be curious to hear from you, like how like it lands to actually sit with and explore this idea of being with your tension enough to express it without necessarily letting it overwhelm you or continuing to lock it down. Because again, we need that fullness of expression, and there's many different ways to do it. So thank you again.